Welcome to Climate Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodness from our TEDxLondon experts in under 5 minutes.
Our guest this evening is a physician with Conservation International. He is a disease detective working in pandemic prevention. He's worked around the world responding to Ebola outbreaks and leading New York City's COVID-19 contact tracing program.
I'm a doctor who specializes in rainforest conservation. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to do public health. My dad was born in India, and he actually had smallpox as a child. And so over 70 years later, you can still see the legacy that the disease left on him in the form of scars on his face.
You mentioned rainforests, that you work specifically on rainforests. And I know that you cover this in your TED Talk, but can you give us like a bird's eye view of the relationship specifically with rainforests and health, and why these two have these interactions?
Mm-hmm. So rainforests have many health benefits, right? Medicines, food, biodiversity, right? And that's like the big picture, mental health. I focus specifically on the infectious disease side, right? So to take a step back, since at least the 1940s, we have seen infectious diseases increasingly emerge around the world. And most of those emerging infectious diseases originate in animals and then jump into people. We call that spillover. And so when we're trying to understand why spillovers are increasing around the world, it's important to recognize that it is because of human activities. Human activities such as deforestation, wildlife trade, the way we raise farmed animals, and human activities that lead to climate change, right? And we can dive deeper into the deforestation. There's at least 3 different reasons why deforestation, so clearing and degrading tropical forests, leads to more infectious disease emergence. Reason number 1 is that when you clear forests, you create this edge where people then, whether intentionally or not, start interacting more with the forest, right? So they build roads, they build towns, farms, whatever it is. And so there's more opportunities for people to interact with wildlife, and then for those wildlife viruses to jump into people. Reason number 2 is that just like us, when we lose our home, we get stressed, we're more likely to get sick, with whether a cold or something more severe. Same thing goes for animals. When you're clear cutting the forest, we are stressing out animals, leading them to be more likely to get sick and then pass on, or not necessarily sick, but more likely to get infected with pathogens and then pass those pathogens on to us. And finally, when we clear forests, we lead to loss of biodiversity, so the variety of life in that area. Biodiversity is a good thing for our health, but what research has shown is that when you clear those forests and have less biodiversity, the animals that tend to disappear are ones that can only live in the forest, but the ones that survive are ones that can live alongside people. Right. Those ones that survive and can live alongside people are also the same types of species that can harbor pathogens that can then go on to infect us. And examples of where deforestation has led to outbreaks include Ebola and probably Nipah virus. Nipah virus was discovered in the 90s in Malaysia when it caused a major outbreak where people experienced a brain infection. Nipah virus kills, in some outbreaks, more than 50% of people that it infects. Very severe infection. And again, because of that clear cutting of forests in Malaysia, one leading hypothesis is that bats got displaced. So they started living in the pig farms that were put in those areas where forests used to exist. Then pigs got infected with that virus, and they then pass it on to people.
Is this what people were saying about COVID as well? Is that the same? Am I making this up? Is that a bad link?
No.
They were saying that it came from bats, right?
Yeah, you're entirely right. There's many coronaviruses that are related to the virus that causes COVID that have been found in bats. And the science...
Sorry.
Yeah, well, the science very strongly shows that wildlife markets were the origin of the COVID pandemic. And I know there are other theories about a lab leak, but again, if you look at the peer-reviewed science, it looks very strongly like it was wildlife markets. But even if you disregard that, I mean, we know that wildlife markets, like the commercial wildlife trade,
can you talk about what is a wildlife market in case people haven't heard of it?
Yeah.
Most people might have, but.
And I'm referring here to places where wildlife is sold in an urban setting. I'm not talking about people in rural settings who hunt wildlife for cultural reasons or for their sustenance. People have a right to access wildlife. But what I'm talking about, in a place like London or a major city in China or in New York City, we don't need to have wildlife markets where live wildlife are sold, particularly birds and mammals. And again, if you disregard the COVID example, even though most scientists in the field think that COVID originated because of that wildlife trade, even if you can look at other outbreaks, the original SARS in 2003, or the first outbreak of Mpox outside of Africa happened in 2003. That was because of the trade of African rodents into the United States for the exotic pet industry, right? That led to the first outbreak of Mpox outside of Africa, right? So my point is that there are certain activities that we engage in as humans that are actually increasing our risk for viral outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics. But the reality is that we need nature to survive. Without nature, we're not going to thrive as a species. Everything is interdependent. And that's what we seem to have forgotten. We seem to have gone down this track of human exceptionalism, that somehow humans are different. And again, I'm just quoting someone else. Humans, we are not apart from nature, we are a part of nature. I've seen the examples of where people have successfully saved rainforests, right? Because again, that's what I focus on, because just taking a step back, over 30% of the emissions reductions needed to reach our climate goals come from nature, such as keeping forests standing. Yet those nature-based solutions get less than 5% of overall climate funding. So we have this disconnect where we overlook nature on the climate side. We're also overlooking nature on the pandemic side. Because again, we don't talk much about how saving rainforests might lead to fewer pandemics down the road.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever heard it, to be fair.
Right, yeah. But like if we invested in forests, for example, we have every dollar spent in saving forests is a dollar that goes a far way. Because not only are you mitigating climate change, you're saving biodiversity, and you're also potentially preventing the next pandemic, right? And people have done this before. They've shown how to save rainforests. One example that comes to mind, let me give you two examples. One is Health and Harmony, which is this amazing nonprofit that originally started working in Indonesia that's focused on listening to indigenous peoples and local communities and then supporting those indigenous peoples and local communities in implementing solutions. And this NGO showed that, at least when it comes to a local level, when local communities are engaging in deforestation, in many instances it's because they don't have means to otherwise survive. They need to clear forests so that they can generate income to pay for basic health or other basic services. This is a matter of survival for them. So this NGO invested in healthcare in the area, and it invested in training people in alternative jobs rather than logging to engage in other types of jobs such as organic farming. And they showed that after a decade of this type of work, that there was a 90% reduction in the number of households engaging in logging. And at the same time, infant mortality dropped by around 2/3. That's a win-win for people and planet. These solutions exist, but for too long, even in my own prior life, we've kept them as people and planet as an opposition, but we need to find those win-wins. The other example I'll give is from the Brazilian Amazon. From 2004 to 2012, the Brazilian government implemented this very expansive effort to return territories to indigenous peoples, to crack down on illegal deforestation. And basically, through the course of that effort, they found that deforestation on an annual basis dropped by 70%. At the same time, agricultural output increased, right? So there are ways to save rainforests. It's just, the question is whether we have the political will to do so.
So to wrap up, Neil, thank you for joining us on this very
so
spooky.
much.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our superstar podcast team at TEDxLondon. Until next time.
Stay curious.